When you look at this question, the first thing that should really stand out to you is you have a little y entangled with this sign, and the y is not isolated. So that means that if you do not have y equals 2, you have to go through the implicit differentiation process. And the key step with implicit differentiation is that you multiply by y prime. All right, so that is where we're going. And when you look at taking the derivative of this left-hand side, and again, we're differentiating with respect to x, the reason why this question is so tricky is because over here, you do need to use the chain rule because you have an inner function of xy. So you would take the derivative of the outer, so you would take the derivative of sine, and that would give you cosine. Then you would keep the inner fixed as xy. So this is the derivative of the outer, and then here we are keeping the inner function fixed. Now, we then multiply that by the derivative of the inner. Now, when you look at the derivative of the inner, you notice here that you have x times y. So you have a variable times another variable. And anytime you have a variable times a variable, you need to go through the product rule. So either in your head or off to the side, you're going to say, okay, my first function is x, my second function is y. First function's derivative is just 1, and then the derivative of y is y prime. So you're plugging into the product rule, crossing these, and then adding them together. So your derivative of your inner here is going to be 1 times y, so just y, and then the other diagonal, you'll have plus xy prime. Now you'll notice that that derivative of your inner is 2 terms. So because it's 2 terms, we have to put parentheses to say all of this is getting multiplied by this, okay? All right, now that is just our left-hand side. Our right-hand side, fortunately, is a little easier to differentiate. 10x's derivative is just gonna be 10. Now, what makes this question a little bit of a challenge is that you do have to simplify and get your y prime by itself. And if you look at trying to get your y prime by itself, it is currently entangled in this parenthesis. So in the process of trying to get your y primes on one side and your no y primes, you are first going to have to distribute cosine xy to the first term and also to the second term. So this is it's going to be an involved process. To get the y primes on one side, we're first going to have to break y prime out of the parentheses because right now it's entangled in those parentheses, okay? So what I'll do is I'll distribute, and I'm going to put this little y in front of the cosine so there's no question about, is this y part of cosine or what's going on? And then plus, and I'm going to do the same thing here, I'm going to put the trig function at the end, so it's going to be xy prime cosine xy is equal to 10. Okay, so now the y prime is out of the parentheses, and now I can focus on getting all my y prime terms to one side and the no y prime terms to the other side. So if you look at this, what I'm going to do for the y prime, no y prime, is on the left-hand side here, this term has to move over to the right-hand side. So I'm going to put my equal sign, and when I move this term over, it's going to change sign. So it's currently a plus, so it's going to become a minus y cosine xy. Now, this term has the y prime, so it's going to stay on that left-hand side. Okay, and then on the right-hand side, I had this plus 10, so that is still going to be on the right-hand side. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll put the equal sign and then shuffle everything to the correct side. Okay, now at that point you have to factor out y prime, but you'll notice here that y prime is already a factor of cosine xy and x because you have multiplication here, multiplication here. So you don't actually have to factor, you can go straight to dividing because again it's a factor already. So you would divide by x, those would cancel, and you would also divide by cosine xy, those would cancel. So over here, you would divide by x and then cosine xy. And that would leave you with y prime is equal to this fraction. So the negative y cosine xy plus 10 over x cosine xy. Okay, and please do be careful. This negative sign is not being distributed to the 10. So you do not want to put the negative in front of the fraction. You just want to put the negative on that particular term in the numerator. And again, also be careful to not get too crazy with your canceling out. This cosine and cosine cannot cancel out because of that plus sign. So because of that two terms, it's not common to both terms. You got to stop. Stop the bus right there and say that that's your final answer.